The morning sun had barely risen, its pale light struggling to pierce through the thick veil of fog that covered the small countryside cemetery. Dew clung to every blade of grass, making each step slippery, but the woman didn't mind. Her worn boots squelched softly as she made her way through the narrow path between the gravestones, clutching a small bundle of wildflowers in her hands. They were unevenly tied with a piece of twine, some petals already wilting, others freshly picked, but to her, they were precious. She had gathered them from the roadside that morning, trading an hour of warmth for the long walk here. Her name was Mary. To most of the world, she was invisible, a cleaner in a local diner, earning just enough to keep a roof over her head. But here, beside this grave, she mattered. She knelt slowly, her knees pressing into the damp earth, and brushed the thin layer of leaves away from the stone. The name etched there, Lena Carter, was one she whispered with reverence, as if speaking it might summon warmth back into the cold morning. "Good morning, Miss Lena," Mary murmured softly, arranging the flowers neatly against the marble. "I brought your favorites again. You always said daisies made you smile." Her voice trembled as she spoke, a mix of affection and grief. She traced the engraved letters with trembling fingers, the chill biting through her skin. "I got the job at the diner like you told me to," she continued. "The manager's a bit mean, but it's work. You'd say that's something to be grateful for." The wind rustled through the trees, lifting a strand of her hair as if in answer. Mary smiled faintly, tears gathering in her eyes. She remembered the day Lena had found her, hungry, shivering, and too proud to beg. Lena had offered her food, a blanket, and something Mary had long forgotten existed, kindness without reason. They had become friends, though from opposite worlds. Even when Lena grew pale and weak, she never stopped visiting Mary, never stopped caring. Now, Mary came every Sunday without fail, speaking into the silence as though Lena still listened. She told her about her struggles, her small victories, and her loneliness. This grave had become her confessional, her comfort, her home in a way no place else was. As she placed a hand over her heart and whispered a quiet prayer, the distant hum of an approaching car broke the stillness. Mary didn't look up. She thought it was just another visitor. But fate was already moving toward her, quiet and inevitable, carried by the sound of polished shoes and grief that mirrored her own. The low hum of the car's engine faded as it came to a stop near the old wrought iron gate of the cemetery. A sleek black vehicle stood in stark contrast to the weathered tombstones and moss-covered paths. The man who stepped out didn't seem to belong to this world of silence and sorrow. His presence was sharp, deliberate, every movement precise. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed immaculately in a tailored charcoal suit that looked as though it had never known a wrinkle or a speck of dust. The morning mist clung to his coat as he walked, his polished shoes glinting faintly each time they caught a sliver of light. His name was Ethan Carter, the CEO of Carter Holdings, a man the newspapers often described as cold, calculating, and untouchable. Yet as he walked through the rows of graves, his steps slowed. The fog pressed close around him, softening the hard edges of his features, revealing the grief beneath. In his hand, he carried a bouquet of white roses wrapped in silver paper, the same kind he brought every week, always to this same grave. It had been 2 years since Lena's death, but the ache had never dulled. He still woke up reaching for her, still caught himself turning to tell her things before remembering the silence waiting for him. He stopped abruptly when he saw a figure kneeling by her grave, a woman, dressed in a faded brown coat and worn shoes, her hair tucked messily beneath a scarf. For a moment, he thought he was mistaken. No one ever came here except him. His first instinct was irritation, some trespasser disturbing Lena's peace, but when he saw the small, fragile flowers in her hands and the reverence in her posture, something inside him shifted. He approached quietly, each footstep muffled by the wet grass. "Excuse me," he said finally, his voice deep but gentle. The woman startled, turning around, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. She clutched the flowers against her chest like a shield. Ethan raised a hand slightly, trying to ease her worry. "I didn't mean to scare you," he continued softly. "I just wasn't expecting anyone here." The woman hesitated, unsure whether to stand or remain kneeling. I'm sorry, sir," she stammered. "I didn't mean no harm. I just come here to visit, Miss Lena." Her words were shy, almost apologetic, but they carried a sincerity that made Ethan pause. He stepped closer, his gaze falling to the name carved in the stone. You knew her? He asked. Yes, she said quietly, lowering her eyes. She helped me once, more than anyone ever did. Ethan's throat tightened. She had that way about her, he murmured. Always finding people to care for. The two stood in silence for a moment, two strangers from entirely different worlds, bound by the same woman, the same loss. The mist swirled around them, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't feel so utterly alone. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air hung heavy between them, filled with the unspoken weight of memory. Ethan's gaze drifted to the flowers the woman had placed at the base of the grave. Wild daisies and marigolds, simple but vibrant, their colors bright against the dull stone. He felt an unexpected ache in his chest. He had always brought expensive bouquets, rare roses flown in from Europe, elegant lilies carefully arranged by professionals. But Lena had loved wildflowers most. She used to stop during their drives just to pick them, laughing when he protested about ruining her dress. She used to say wildflowers were special, Ethan said quietly, his eyes fixed on the grave. Because they grew without care, without anyone tending to them, just the wind and sun keeping them alive. Mary looked up, surprised that he knew. That's what she told me too, she whispered. Her voice trembled slightly, but there was warmth in it. She said people are like that sometimes. Some of us don't have much, but we grow anyway. Ethan turned to her then, really looking at her for the first time. Her face was pale and thin, lined by years of struggle, but her eyes held the same gentle resilience he remembered in Lena. You must have meant a lot to her, he said softly. Mary shook her head. No, sir, I was just someone she helped. I was sleeping in the park then, and she brought me soup. She never told me who she really was, just that her name was Lena. She gave a small, sad smile. I thought she was an angel. Ethan's breath caught. He had never known about this side of his wife's life. He had been too busy, too wrapped up in meetings, deadlines, and deals, to see what she did when he wasn't looking. Shame flickered across his face. I didn't know, he said hoarsely. I thought I knew everything about her, but I didn't even know she was out helping people like you. Mary bowed her head. She didn't like to talk about herself. I tried to thank her once, but she said kindness doesn't need witnesses. Ethan smiled faintly through the grief. That sounds like her. He crouched beside the grave, his hand brushing over the carved letters. His voice softened to a whisper. You were always giving pieces of yourself away, Lena, and somehow, I was too blind to see how many hearts you healed. The fog thickened, wrapping the two mourners in a cocoon of stillness. Mary placed her hand gently on the grave once more. She changed my life, sir, she said quietly. I come here because I never got to say goodbye. Ethan's jaw tightened, emotion flickering behind his calm exterior. Neither did I, he admitted. Their eyes met, one filled with humble gratitude, the other with regret. For the first time, they understood that grief didn't recognize wealth or poverty, it simply made equals of everyone it touched. The wind picked up, sweeping through the graveyard, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and fallen leaves. The mist had begun to lift, and the pale sunlight filtered through the bare branches, bathing the grave in a soft, golden glow. Ethan stood still, staring at the headstone as if it held answers he'd never found in all his years of success. Mary remained beside him, unsure whether to stay or leave. Something in his posture, a quiet vulnerability, kept her rooted to the spot. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small, cream-colored card. His fingers lingered on it for a moment before he set it gently beside the flowers she had laid. This is my address, he said quietly. Come by tomorrow morning. Mary blinked in confusion, glancing from the card to him. Sir, I don't understand, she murmured. Why would you want me to come? He looked at her then, his eyes tired but sincere. Because my wife helped you, he said softly. And I think she'd want me to help you too. Mary immediately shook her head, panic flickering across her face. No, please, I don't want charity, she said quickly. She helped me because she cared, not because she wanted to be repaid. I couldn't take anything from you. Ethan's expression softened, and a faint, sad smile crossed his face. It's not charity, he said. It's gratitude. She gave her kindness freely, and I spent years giving nothing but money in return. Let me do something she would have done. Not for me, for her. Mary hesitated. The card trembled between her fingers as she stared down at it. The edges were crisp, the handwriting elegant, so different from her world of worn-out paper and faded ink. Her throat tightened. What would she say if she saw us now? She whispered. Ethan's gaze lifted toward the stone, his jaw tightening slightly. She'd probably smile, he said after a pause. She'd say I finally learned something about what really matters. Silence settled again, broken only by the rustling of the trees. A bird landed briefly on the headstone before flying off, its wings cutting through the last threads of fog. Mary reached out, touching the stone one last time, her fingertips tracing Lena's name. I'll come, she said finally, her voice low but steady. But only because she would have wanted it that way. Ethan nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. That's all I ask. They stood together for a while longer, not speaking, both lost in their own memories. The world around them seemed to still, the graveyard holding its breath. When they finally parted ways, Mary turned back once, watching the powerful man who now seemed so small in his grief. As she walked down the winding path, the card pressed to her chest, she felt something shift inside her, hope, fragile but real. And at the grave, Ethan remained standing, his hand resting on the cold marble, whispering into the quiet air, "You're still bringing people together, Lena, even from heaven."